In a world where presidents come and go, retire or fall from grace, one man has remained a seemingly unmovable figure on the African continent. His name is Paul Biya, okay? The president of Cameroon, and the man who has ruled longer than any other living head of state, excluding monarchs. At the staggering age of 92 years, when many have, retreated into, quiet retirement or passed on, Paul Biya is doing unimaginable, announcing his intention to seek an 8th term in office. Now, this story is not about Paul Biya as a president or maybe as an old man clinging to power. No, it's about the political soul of a nation. For over 42 years, Paul Biya has shaped the destiny of Cameroon, and sometimes gently, often firmly, and at times controversially. He is both admired and feared, praised for keeping the country relatively stable in a turbulent region, and also condemned for presiding over repression, corruption, and also democratic decacy. Now, why does a man who lives most of the year in a luxury hotel in Geneva still wield such firm control over the entire country? Why do millions of Cameroonians, many of them under 30 and too young to remember any other president, continue to see their future through the lens of a man born in 1933? As Biya now moves to extend his rule into a 5th decade, Cameroonians and the world are asking critical questions. In this, the preservation of order or a resistance to change? Is Cameroon a democracy or an elected monarchy? And what does this say about African leadership, succession, and also the role of the people? So in this video, I'm going to be taking you deep into the life, rise, and rule of Paul Biya. From his childhood in a quiet village to the gilded halls of French institutions, and also all the way to Etude Paris. This is the story of a man who outlived his rivals, silenced his critics, and now stares down time itself. Don't forget to subscribe, okay? Like the video and share if you care about the future of African leadership. Let us dive into the saga of President Paul Biya, the man who refuses to step down. Now, Paul Biya was born in 1933, that was 13th of February, in a very small village of Muvomeka, located in the southern region of Cameroon. His birth came during a period when Cameroon was still under French colonial administration, right? And the society around him was deeply traditional, religious, and also hierarchical, and his father was a catechist for the Catholic Church, while his mother managed the household and also ensured her children were grounded in discipline and also humility. Young Paulo, grew up in a modest environment, but was always noted for being intellectually sharp and also composite. From an early age, Paul Biya showed academic promise, excelling in Catholic mission school, and he was disciplined, he was obedient, and had a quiet seriousness about him that earned him what we can call a respect among peers and also teachers. The Catholic missionaries who educated him saw a future leader in him, okay? Someone who could serve both church and also state. This a discipline that he showed, it earned him respect among peers, you understand? And the religious foundation, it would shape his quiet, stoic, and, throughout his life. A man of few words but carefully measured actions. His academic brilliance earned him a scholarship to study in France, where he attended prestigious schools like the Lycée Le Grand, which has actually educated French presidents and also philosophers. He later pursued studies at the University of Paris and also eventually at Sciences Po, one of the top political science institutions in Europe. This was not just education, it was grooming. So Paul Biya was being molded to serve, perhaps even rule in post-colonial world. But while in France, Paul Biya absorbed French culture, politics, and also bureaucracy. He learned how power functioned, not just through the force, but also through systems, through influence, and also control. He observed the French political class and also internalized how leaders presented themselves, stayed calm in crisis, and also consolidated authority, through networks. It was during this time that he developed his style, soft-spoken, non-confrontational, but always watching and also calculating. And unlike many African leaders of his generation, Paul Biya was not part of any revolutionary or independence movement. He did not take to the streets, shout in rallies, or challenge colonial rule. Instead, he positioned himself to work within the system, a bureaucratic strategist rather than a populist firebrand. So this would prove to be his greatest political strength, maybe perhaps his most dangerous, quality. By the time he returned to Cameroon, that was in 1960s there, Cameroon was already an independent state under the leadership of President Ahmadou Ahidjo. So Paul Biya entered the civil service with the aura of a European trade intellectual and also, quickly began ascending through the ranks. What followed was one of the most remarkable and also quiet rises to power in African history. After returning from France, Paul Biya quickly integrated himself into Cameroonian civil service. His French education and also bureaucratic style impressed President Ahmadou Ahidjo, who saw him as a loyal and also efficient technocrat. By 1962, Paul Biya was already serving as charge de mission at the presidency. He was organized, he was quiet, and also did not attract attention, a sharp contrast to the power-vocal political class emerging in the post-independence period. So in 1968 there, Paul Biya was promoted to Director of the Civil Cabinet, a position that placed him at the center of power. His loyalty to Ahidjo was unquestioned. He avoided functional politics and also focused solely on administrative work. This helped him earn trust, but it also reinforced a perception of him as politically neutral, a man without ambition, which made him the perfect successor in Ahidjo's eyes. So, by 1975, he was appointed Prime Minister, in case you didn't know, the first person in Cameroonian history to hold that title. And his rise was rapid, but few saw him as the future president. He was seen as a tool of the system, intelligent, yes, but not charismatic or revolutionary. However, Paul Biya had learned to play the long game. He studied the mechanics of power quietly and also waited for the right moment to act. So that moment came in 1982. When President Ahidjo unexpectedly resigned, citing health reasons. Under the Cameroonian constitution, the Prime Minister would automatically succeed him. So to the surprise of the nation, and even Biya himself, he was suddenly president. Many believed Ahidjo planned the rule, to rule from behind the scenes with Biya as the figurehead. But Paul Biya had other plans. Within 2 years, he had successfully marginalized Ahidjo's loyalists. In 1984, a failed coup attempt by elements within the Republican Guard reportedly loyal to Ahidjo gave Biya the justification he needed to purge the military and also consolidate power. He abolished the post of Prime Minister and also reshaped the presidency in his own image. Paul Biya's true nature began to emerge, calculating, deliberate, and also unyielding. The man who had once seemed apolitical was now firmly in control. His long journey from a quiet village in southern Cameroon to the presidency was complete, but his real mission had just begun: to stay in power by any means necessary. Now, following the 1984 coup attempt, Paul Biya swiftly to strengthen his grip on that state, he declared a state of emergency, suspended several constitutional rights, and also began arresting anyone remotely linked to the uprising. The repression was very brutal but effective. Paul Biya used the opportunity to remove opportunists and opponents from the key oppositions in the army, police, and also civil services. Now, he then turned his attention to the ruling party. In 1985, Paul Biya rebranded Cameroon National Union into Cameroon People's Democratic Movement. It was more than just a name change. It was a signal that the Biya era had officially begun. The Cameroon People's Democratic Movement became the sole legal political party, and Paul Biya, its questioned leader. Internal dissent was not tolerated. Paul Biya understood that control was not just about force, it was about managing perception. So he carefully cultivated a personality cult. His portrait began appearing in every government building, classroom, and also newspaper. He rarely spoke publicly, but when he did, his words were presented as national doctrine. Cameroon had entered the era of silent authoritarianism. Now, the media, already limited, was brought under tighter control. Independent voices were silenced. State TV became a tool of government propaganda. And also journalists critical of Biya were harassed or imprisoned. The country became a textbook case of managed democracy. Elections were held, but their outcomes were never in doubt. Under Paul Biya, power was centralized. To an extreme degree, the judiciary became an arm of the executive, and the regional governors reported directly to the presidency. Cameroon's parliament, known as the National Assembly, became a rubber stamp institution. Ministers and members of parliament feared Paul Biya, who could dismiss them without notes or explanation. Despite his autocratic consolidation, Paul Biya maintained a calm, almost detached, unlike many African strongmen who ruled with bombast. He ruled from the shadows. This invisible style of leadership became his trademark and also perhaps his greatest weapon. As the world changed around him, Paul Biya stayed quiet, calculating, and also immovable. Now, throughout the late 1980s Cameroon under Paul Biya settled into a predictable pattern of one-man rule. The CPDM nominated every level of government, from village councils to the national parliament. Elections were held regularly, but they were more ceremonial than competitive. Candidates were handpicked and results were often known in advance. Still, Paul Biya maintained the image of a democratic leader. He attended international summits, hosted visiting dignitaries, and also spoke of modernization and reform. But within Cameroon, the reality was different. Opposition voices were not only discouraged, they were treated as enemies of the state. Political arrests became common and freedom of assembly was, curtailed. So, despite the repression, Paul Biya's regime was relatively stable. Okay, Cameroon avoided the civil wars and also coups that plagued other African nations, and this gave Paul Biya international credibility. Western governments and also institutions, they saw him as a safe pair of hands in a volatile region. He was fluent in French, differential in diplomacy, and also avoided scandal. A perfect post-colonial leader from the West perspective. However, the country's economy began to falter, declining oil prices and also rising debt led to the economic crisis in the early 1990s there. Cameroon was forced to accept structural adjustment programs from the International Monetary Fund and also World Bank. These reforms included privatizing state companies, reducing subsidies, and also, cutting public sector jobs. All deeply unpopular moves. Public dissatisfaction grew, and so did calls for democracy, but Paul Biya remained unmoved. Even as protests erupted in cities and also students marched for political reforms, the regime cracked down with tear gas, arrests, and also bans on demonstrations. His message was clear: stability was more important than freedom. By the end of the 1980s, Paul Biya had become the absolute master of Cameroon. His critics saw him as a dictator in a suit, while his supporters believed he was the only man who could hold the country together. Either way, he had reshaped the nation in his image, and he was not going anywhere. So by the early 1990s, the global tide had shifted. The fall of the Soviet Union, democratization in Eastern Europe, and also pressure from international donors forced many African nations to abandon one-party rule. Cameroon was no exception. Okay, faced with the growing unrest and also international scrutiny, Paul Biya reluctantly introduced multi-party democracy in 1990. The opposition seized the moment. John Frundi, leader of the Social Democratic Front, the SDF, emerged as the formidable challenger. Charismatic and backed by the Anglophone population, Frundi called for genuine democracy and also reforms. When the 1992 presidential election was announced, Cameroonians hoped for real change. Now, that hope was short-lived, though Fulundi was widely believed to have won or at least forced a runoff. Paul Biya was declared the winner, with just over 40% of the vote. The process was marred by ballot stuffing, voter suppression, and also violence. Observers, they cried foul, but the international community remained largely silent. Fulundi was placed under house arrest, and protests were violently crushed. Paul Biya's response was simple. He allowed the form of democracy, but never its subsistence, or what we can call the substance. Elections would become part of the political ritual, but never a tool to transfer of power. Okay, this hybrid model, electoral authoritarianism, it will define the next decades. Now, the SDF and other parties continued to contest elections, but they were never allowed to win. Electoral commissions remained under the president's control, and gerrymandering issued, the CPDM dominance. Meanwhile, Paul Biya painted the opposition as foreign-backed troublemakers and also defenders of chaos. To the outside world, Cameroon looked like a democracy, but for those on the inside, it was clear Paul Biya had reinvented authoritarianism for the 21st century, clean, quiet, and well-dressed. Okay, now that is your Paul Biya. Let me tell you something else you feel you want to know about. Maybe something you should know about Paul Biya, because Paul Biya is someone that if I'm sitting and talk about Paul Biya, I think we would even spend a day or maybe a whole week talking about Paul Biya as president of Cameroon. Now let me tell you something. Now, as Paul Biya's rule, entered the third decade, a strange pattern began to emerge. The president was rarely seen in public. Unlike many of his African counterparts who made frequent public appearances, Paul Biya seemed to disappear for months. Rumors, came around about his death, his whereabouts, and who was actually running the country. What became clear was that Cameroon was governed by a man who ruled best by being invisible. Okay? Yes, and when I say this, people will think no. But let me tell you something. Paul Biya developed a unique lifestyle and baffled many observers. He spent a significant portion of his time abroad, especially in the Intercontinental Hotel in Geneva, Switzerland. There is a luxurious hotel where he usually stays. In that luxurious seclusion, he received Cameroonian ministers and also made executive decisions from thousands of kilometers away. And this behavior earned him the nickname the absentee president. Despite his distance from daily affairs, Paul Biya remained firmly in control. His network of loyalists in government, security, and also intelligence services ensured that the decisions were carried out in his name. His absence from the capital was not seen as a sign of weakness, but as a deliberate strategy, one that made him omnipresent yet untouchable. His rare public appearances were tightly, choreographed events, and he would speak softly, briefly, and also always in a composed manner. Even in times of national crisis, such as the Boko Haram attacks in the north, or maybe an arrest of the Anglophone regions, Paul Biya chose to remain silent. The silence frustrated many, but also added to his way of governing the country. And for Cameroonians, the president became more of a symbol than a person, a distant figure who existed more in photographs than reality. His governing style, blurred the lines between presence and absence, authority and detachment. In doing so, he created a form of remote, what we can call autocracy that had no precedent in African politics. And yet, this style worked for him. By staying above the fray, Paul Biya avoided scandals and also backlash that plagued other long-serving leaders. He ruled not with an iron fist, but with a velvet glove that was always just out of reach. One of the most significant challenges to Paul Biya's presidency emerged not from the ballot box, but from within the country's borders, the Anglophone Crisis. Now, Cameroon, though officially bilingual, it is deeply divided between its French-speaking majority and the English-speaking majority, a legacy of colonial history involving both the French and the British. So the crisis began in 2016 when the Anglophone lawyers and teachers in the northwest and southwest regions began protesting against the use of French in courts and also schools. What started as peaceful demonstrations quickly escalated when the government responded with force. Internet blackouts, mass arrests, and also live bullets were used to suppress the protesters, further emerging and also angering the population. Now, soon, calls for reform turned into calls for succession. Separatist groups declared the independence of a new nation called Ambazonia, leading to armed conflict between government forces and also the insurgents. Thousands were killed and hundreds of thousands displaced. Schools were shut down, villages were destroyed, and also the civilians were caught in the crossfire. Throughout this whole turmoil, President Biya maintained his characteristic silence. He made few public appearances and statements and also delegated the crisis to his ministers and military commanders. His inaction was widely criticized both domestically and also internationally. Many believed that the dialogue could have, de-escalated the situation, but Paul Biya chose repression instead. The conflict has deeply scarred the nation. The Anglophone regions remain militarized, and trust between the people and the central government has been shattered. Critics argue that Paul Biya's refusal to engage has prolonged the suffering and also alienated a significant portion of the population. Yet from the perspective of the regime, the strategy may have worked. The separatist movement remains, fractured, and the central government still holds the territory, but the cost in lives, unity, and Cameroonians' global image has been enormous. So, despite Cameroon's natural resources, it has oil, it has timber, it has cocoa, and also coffee, the country's economic performance under Paul Biya has been underwhelming. Decades of mismanagement, corruption, and also weak institutions have left Cameroon with high unemployment, poor infrastructure, and also growing inequality. For many, the promise of independence and also stability has not translated into prosperity. And under Paul Biya, the economy has become highly centralized, with key sectors controlled by small elite closely tied to presidency. Public contracts are awarded to colonies, and corruption is widespread at the level of government transparency. International, has consistently ranked Cameroon as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. So while the government has occasionally lauded and launched anti-corruption campaigns, these efforts are widely viewed as selective and also politically motivated. High-profile arrests have targeted rivals and also disloyal officials, while those close to Paul Biya remain untouched. The president himself has never been directly implicated, but critics argue that the system of patronage cannot exist without his approval. International lenders such as the International Monetary Fund and also the World Bank, they have, pressured Cameroon to reform, but progress has been slow. Structured adjustment programs have led to austere measures that, hurt ordinary citizens, while elites continue to thrive. Youth unemployment remains, dangerously high, driving thousands to seek opportunities abroad. And despite all these challenges, Paul Biya's regime continues to boast about infrastructure projects and also economic growth figures. Roads, stadiums, and also government buildings have been constructed, yes, but many of these projects are overpriced and poorly executed. Basic services like healthcare and education remain unfunded and also underfunded. For the average Cameroonian, life is hard and uncertain. Many have lost faith in the government's ability or willingness to improve their conditions, yet Paul Biya remains in power, a symbol of continuity in a system that rewards loyalty over performance. In 2025 this year, the news broke. President Paul Biya, now 92 years old, had announced his intention to run for an 8th term in office. The reaction was swift and divided. Supporters hailed his decision as necessary. Now, in 2025, the news broke, President Paul Biya, 92 years old, had announced his intention to run for an 8th term in office. The reaction was swift and divided, Supporters hailed his decision as necessary for stability, while critics, were outraged that a there is a way how they look at Paul Biya. Some they say he's This man would actually once again dominate the political stage in a country desperate for change. Paul Biya's announcement did not come with a campaign rally or public address, no. But as always, it was quite a declaration, calculated through official media and also party structures. And the CPDM party, immediately mobilized its machinery, praising Paul Biya as the father of the nation and also the only man capable of leading Cameroon into the future. Opposition parties denounced the move as a betrayal of democracy. Civil society groups called for term limits and also generational change, but as with previous, elections, few believed that any real contest would occur. The Electoral Commission remained firmly under government influence and the security forces were loyal to Paul Biya. The announcement reignited debates across Africa about age, leadership, and also power. Should a man in his 90s still be ruling a nation of young people? What message does this send to aspiring leaders? And more importantly, what does this mean for the future of democracy in Cameroon? And for Paul Biya, the answer seems simple. He believes he's the best, maybe only option. Whether this is born of conviction or fear, what comes after him is unclear. But what is clear is that Paul Biya has no intention of stepping aside voluntarily. And as the campaign season unfolds, all signs point to another predictable outcome. Yet, beneath the surface, frustration is growing, a new generation is watching and waiting. Paul Biya's story is one of the paradoxes. He's one of the most enduring leaders in modern history, yet also one of the most enigmatic. He has maintained peace in a volatile region, yes, yet his silence has fueled divisions. He has avoided the chaos of coups and rebellions, yet left a legacy marked by economic stagnation and also political suppression. At 92 years, Paul Biya is more than just a president. He is a system himself, a culture and a cautionary tale. His rule raises fundamental questions about power and its limits. How long is it too long? At what point does stability become stagnation? Okay, and what happens when a nation becomes so reliant on one man that it forgets how to function without him? As Cameroon heads into yet another election with the same name at the top of the ballot, the world watches with mixed emotions: fascination, frustration, and concern. Paul Biya's 8th term bid is not just about Cameroon; it's a mirror reflecting the broader challenge of governance across Africa. But history teaches us that no reign is eternal, okay? One day Paul Biya will leave the stage by force, by choice, or by nature. And when that day comes, Cameroon must be ready. The question is, will the country have the institutions, leaders, and also vision to carry on without him? Thank you for watching, guys. If you found this documentary so insightful, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you think. Should Paul Biya seek another term, or is it time for a new chapter in Cameroon's history? Until next time, my name is Dedan, and this is Dedan Vlogs.